The phrase fair chance hiring, a lot of people may have heard the term second chance hiring, essentially speaks to hiring someone who has some type of criminal record or criminal history. And the fundamental principle behind it is just that fair chance hiring means that the employer is intentional about not letting that weed them out before they've given them a fair consideration just based on their skills, their qualifications, their ability to do the job.
I'm Stuart Yasgur, and this is Economic Architecture, the podcast. The bulk of our conversations on fair chance hiring, whether it's with innovators like Sharon Dietrich's seismic systemic policy change that provides people a clean slate by automatically expunging their record, or the organization Resume, led by Jody Anderson and Ryan Brennan, who help employers navigate regulatory reform and compliance concerns to hopefully advance better hiring practices for people who have criminal records. All these incredible innovators and innovations highlight an important reality. Structural change is not only possible, but it's within our power to bring it about. People want to help others, and many people who are closest to these challenges have the greatest ability to make change. They bring a challenge to the surface, whether through lived experience or close encounters with people most affected, and they run to the drawing boards to design a solution. Hello, Harley. Thank you for joining us today.
Stuart, it's good to see you. Glad to be here.
Harley Blakeman is the definition of that kind of innovator. He's a person whose experience and action came together to create a new innovation. He's the founder and CEO of Honest Jobs. It's a national employment platform which helps companies hire formerly incarcerated job seekers. They've raised around $3 million in venture capital and generated over $1 million in revenue, helping support job seekers that face the barrier that's created by criminal records.
Making a great first impression and telling them how committed you're going to be to their company is enough for a small business or medium-sized business. But for a big business, that's step one, is like getting the offer. Because then there's all this other stuff. Who reviews the background check? Do they make the decision or does the hiring manager make the decision? If the background check gets flagged, who does that go to? Is there an independent board that reviews that and makes decisions? Is there really understanding who's involved?
By helping job seekers navigate a whole array of concerns and often complex information that isn't easily accessible about employers, Harley found a way to support the practice of fair chance hiring by bringing more visibility to the people looking for secure, stable living, making it more likely that employers will see the full applicant and not just define them by their records.
It's so important because it's just such a massive part of the United States workforce. Our employers are always looking, companies are always looking for people. It's a huge part of a business is the people. And there's studies all across the country that have been done by many different institutions that say it's 1 in 3 Americans have a criminal record of some sort. Depending on where you get the data, somewhere between 9 and 11% have a felony conviction. And oftentimes these convictions just cause a lot of employers to just completely bypass all of those people without giving them really fair considerations.
For businesses, it's a huge talent opportunity. And for those individuals, it really then creates this massive impediment to make employment in general, but also to be able to make the kind of contribution they're capable of.
Absolutely. In my capacity running Honest Jobs, I've worked with over 200,000 people with records, helping them find employment through our services. But what we know is when people come home, finding that first job is just absolutely critical. I mean, you're in such a vulnerable point when you are coming home from jail or prison. You may have new fines and fees. You may have court dates. You may have lost your apartment, depending on how your arrest happened. You may end up being homeless because of your arrest. You're in such a vulnerable position that when you can't find employment, it just makes it such really an unnecessary burden because these people are no different than a lot of other people, right? They have been arrested, but they're still able to work. They still have the same skills they had before. And there's really not, in many cases, most cases, there's not a good reason not to hire them other than bias or systemic processes that are in place that the employers might have. So what we see is, millions of people, about 4 million people a year go through the jails and prisons total. Some of those are repeats, but those people end up needing government assistance. They end up costing the taxpayers money rather than generating taxes. And it puts an immense burden on our healthcare system as well. There's just a lot of negative effects. And when you just step back to that human level, it's very hard on an individual who is applying for jobs, who is showing up to interviews to just be rejected over and over and over again. And it is not uncommon at all for us to hear from people that said, I've been given dozens of job offers that were taken away after the background check. And I've been applying for jobs for 6 months, 12 months, right? That's a really important thing for us to fix. And we want to keep families together. We want people working in the community and not going back to jail. So making sure that they can get that employment is just so important.
And those people that you're talking about, these are people who they've gone through the interview, they've applied, they've gone through the interview process, they've actually gotten a job offer. So somebody's already said, we think you can do this job. We want to hire you. And then when that background check comes back for something from the past, they are then losing that opportunity. And so it kind of creates that impediment, even though the employer and the employee, potential employees, see it as a good fit.
And there's layers to it. There's obviously problems of people having a hard time getting an offer when they came home from prison. And that might be professionalism. It might be a lack of skills or education or qualifications, why they can't get interviews. But if they're getting interviews and they're getting offers, and then those offers are being taken away, that has nothing to do with their ability to do the job or their ability to compete in the marketplace, right? The free market is saying that they're the most qualified candidate if they're getting a job offer. Then it becomes to systemic issues where the employer itself has a policy that says we won't hire people with records, or they're just misaligned from somewhere between the hiring manager and, I mean, we incarcerate a lot of people in America. We arrest a lot of people. And the truth is like, I'm not an advocate for lawlessness. I think our law and order is important. We need to have jails and prisons, I believe, but they shouldn't be the solution, and that we can't let systems lock them out of opportunity in America. We can't let them permanently make them a burden, honestly, on the taxpayer, on the rest of the people who many of us want them to work. We want them to get the job. We got to find ways to support people and organizations and systems that are ready to actually do that work, because it is a growing trend. It is more and more common for HR professionals to know about fair chance and second chance hiring. And we're starting to see more and more prisons and jail systems invest in getting people more ready for the workforce. So I'd say on both sides of the equation, we're seeing positive momentum that is exciting.
You talked before about the systemic barrier that people are facing. You've been working at this for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and how do you see the problem and how are you trying to contribute to addressing it?
I've been working on this for about 7 years. Started by just individually helping guys coming home from prison in Columbus, Ohio, get their first job. And I wasn't making any money. It was like literally volunteer. But eventually started LLC because I found that companies were willing to pay a small fee if you find me a good employee that's willing to stay, like they would pay. So that showed me that there's real economic value in getting employers a person that wants to be there, that will show up on time, that will do good work. And that's pretty common sense. But the surprise was that they were willing to put that same value on someone who had that lived experience of being in jail or prison. So over the last 6 or 7 years since then, we've created an online platform where we've been lucky enough to work with like well over 1,500 companies. Many of those companies are big businesses like Fortune 100. We've probably worked with 15 Fortune 500 companies, but we've worked with obviously hundreds of small and medium-sized businesses. And a Fortune 100 company has a different problem than a small business. If they both don't hire people with records, it's usually for completely different reasons. And there's different motivations. There's different ability for them to change their mind and behave differently. Like I said, on the job seeker side, so the online service we provide, Honest Jobs, is like a marketplace. Job seekers come to us, employers come to us, and we help match them. Over 200,000 justice-impacted people have used our service nationwide. We're in all 50 states. We've helped thousands of people find jobs, and on average, they report finding jobs about 7 times faster. But the reason why is really the methodology that I think is important. Is all we've done is empowered the job seekers with knowledge that they didn't have before. When they look at jobs on our site, we show them this employer has hired 275 people with a felony. This employer has hired 17 people with a felony. This employer. So every job they're able to see, is this really an employer that's even going to give me a chance? It's so painful being rejected over and over and over again that people will really do anything to avoid that, including giving up or including going to a staffing agency where they know they don't have upward mobility. They know they're not going to get paid good. They just don't want to go through that process over and over and over again. So with our service, we're giving them some insights that's really helped people feel more confident, show up on time, show up with a good attitude, and then ultimately they have a higher chance of getting hired because they know that this employer actually has been hiring people. The last piece of it that we learned over the years was how to kind of read a job description in an industry. Like if you say, I'm in the construction industry and I'm looking for a project manager, you give us the job description, we can kind of tell you based on best practices, these are the types of crimes that you should be okay with, and these are the ones that you probably shouldn't be okay with. And that's from a risk perspective. So we're not an insurance company, but we have a risk model that's just based on the EEOC guidelines. So the federal courts created guidelines for how to consider people with criminal records, but it's basically consider the nature of the crime and the nature of the job duties. And we have an algorithm that can read a job description and tell the job seeker based on your crime, it's either red, yellow, or green. We keep it super simple, but green means you have a good chance, red means you don't have a good chance based on your crime. And that's helped a lot of people.
That's really helpful. And I think it has the potential to change what the position is for the job seeker, right? Job seeking can be disempowering for so many people because many people end up feeling like they're just asking for something and they're not equipped to understand how to navigate it successfully. But here you're starting to say, okay, first, given the information that you provide them, they can start to navigate and say, okay, am I a good fit for this?
That's right. Because it goes from a question of who will give me a job? Will anyone give me a job? I'm just looking for someone to say yes. It almost doesn't matter what it is because I just need someone to say yes to, okay, I've narrowed it. I'm not looking for a needle in a haystack anymore. There's a bunch of needles here. There's a bunch of companies that I think will give me a chance. Now I'm actually saying, what do I want? What am I qualified for? What would I be good at?
And you're also looking at like the behavior of companies. What have they done before? Are they demonstrating their openness to hire by hiring and then equipping job seekers with that kind of information so they know, okay, this is an employer who can really see the opportunities here.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that is really obvious when you're on our site. You're able to look into this is a really big company. Why do they only have 10, right? If they're a national company, they should have more than 10. Some of the national companies have hundreds. But also, there's a ton of knowledge that we've gained and things we've learned about how this works that isn't obvious. We don't share publicly, right? We're not in the business of shaming companies for not doing things right. But we have learned a lot about what you might see publicly from a company versus what they're actually doing in the back office, why they might say it's working or not working versus why it actually isn't working. There usually isn't an exact match there. And we understand why the people might not be able to hire as many people as they express that they want to, or as they say that they are, but it's discouraging in some ways. There's a lot of organizations doing work that I can't do, and my small business can't do all of it, but everything from narrative change to culture shifts to political activism to HR consultancies are offering more services around this issue to local nonprofits, working with chambers of commerce. Tons of work is happening that I think is going to bring this movement further.
You mentioned that there are other insights that you learn from job seekers about what job seekers need and how they do this successfully. Are there some of those that you can share with us?
This isn't revolutionary, but I'd say if I had to create a checklist for the justice impacted person, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to them about why employers need to change. The reality is like, I don't think I would have a hard time finding a job right now. And I have 2 felonies. And one of them is a grand theft felony, which is a very hard felony for an employer to overlook. But that is because I have made myself a very marketable candidate. I have great letters of recommendation. I've been a volunteer with many organizations. I have a track record of employment. So like, you can't go from 0 to where I am necessarily, but getting that first job is the most important thing. So any job, we always say, find ABCs is like any job, a better job, a career, or a job, a better job, a career. Getting any job is so important. And it's hard to get any job if you don't have a resume that's free of spelling errors and grammar mistakes. If you don't have a voicemail that works, that isn't full, if you don't have an email that you check, right? These are things that many people in jail and prison maybe didn't have before, right? They lived in rural America. There weren't professional jobs, or they just had odd jobs, or they never had a job before. So many of those things are like low-hanging fruit that seems so easy, but really it's not if no one's taught them how to do those things. So this is where correctional facilities, nonprofits going into prisons, or even working post-release, government agencies could really lean into these things and figure out how to make sure that at minimum, when people are coming home, they are ready to get their first job. And that includes getting identification as well. Many people come home without the 3 critical forms of identification, a birth certificate, social security card, and an ID, and might set you back 6 months if you're trying to get a job and you don't have transportation and you got to figure out how to get your birth certificate. When I came home, I didn't have any of those 3. because I was homeless before I went to prison. I had a family with master's degrees who helped me, and thank God for them because I was able to get it, but it still took me almost two months to get all that. And I had like educated people helping me. So when someone comes home and they don't have identification, they don't have a resume that's correct or a voicemail set up, those are the kind of low hanging fruit. But the other last tip I'll share is like making sure that people know, don't be proactive in sharing your record. If you have a good interview going on, don't bring it up unless they bring it up. I learned this the hard way. No one taught me this. Wait until they say, we're going to do a background check next. Or you can ask, what are next steps? But don't in that first interview say, do you hire felons? Or, hey, I've been to prison. Will you still hire me? You really have to make that first interview and that first experience all about making yourself the best candidate. And yeah, you have to compete in the market. So you have to improve yourself, make yourself better.
Yeah, it's also actionable, right? There's concrete steps that people can take. And then on the employer side, you said large employers, small employers, different insights, different lessons learned, or can you shed a little light on?
Yeah, at the high level, I mean, if you think of a small business, a family that owns 2 restaurants or a retail store or small landscaping company, right? Hiring decisions are handled very differently. They may not have an applicant tracking system that automates weeding people out. They may not have 3 layers of HR. They likely have a person who is interviewing that is ultimately going to go back to the person who owns the business and say, hey, this is the person I want to hire. Or maybe there is no one else they have to report to. They've been given authority to just make these decisions on their own. Those people tend to make decisions based on the culture of their company. Like many times, if it's a faith-based family that owns a business, right? They may be like, oh, at my church, we volunteer at the prisons. They have a prison ministry. So absolutely, we care. But that same CEO, once their company has 5,000 employees, they don't make decisions that same way where it's just like, oh, based on my community values, my faith values, whatever, I'm going to hire this person. And it's not because they don't want to. It's just that like the bureaucracy, the systems, the challenges there, the insurance people that may have made them sign something. That's really what it is like making a great first impression and telling them how committed you're going to be to their company usually is enough for a small business or medium-sized business, right? But for a big business, that's step 1 is like getting the offer. Because then there's all this other stuff. Who reviews the background check? Do they make the decision or does the hiring manager make the decision? If the background check gets flagged, who does that go to? Is there an independent board that reviews that and makes decisions? So we worked with companies who paid us lots of money to help them source talent. They had established whole units in their HR departments that were just to hire justice impacted people. And after 6 months or a year, they came back to us and said, hey, we're sorry. It turns out like we were falsely given information that this was something we were going to be able to do. And turns out we haven't been able to hire any of the people and it's not your fault, it's ours. And I'm like, okay, well, what's happening? And they're like, we're just going to focus on a different initiative. And I'm like, how does this happen in a company of this size with this budget? I don't actually know the answer, but I think in simple terms, the answer is bureaucracy. There's just too many chefs in the kitchen. There's too many people. And it's really discouraging because companies like these are public sometimes saying that they do this or that they support this when in reality, they can't even do it when they want to do it. That's not always the case, but I have seen edge cases where it's like that with really big companies. Another takeaway for job seekers is aim for small businesses if you're having a hard time because it can be a lot easier to get hired at a small business than a large company.
One of the things I learned from you is also how large maybe the difference can be between like stated aims to make progress by large companies in fair chance hiring and actually what the practice is. As we were doing a ton of research into this space, we certainly looked at everybody who's kind of stated that they have a goal of hiring. And some actually report their numbers, but it's hard as a third party to get any real sense of what's happening. That's someplace where you've looked and said, okay, here are companies who are actually doing a really good job of hiring.
That's right. Many of the employers in our site that have hired dozens or hundreds of people, you won't find anything publicly that they're not part of the Second Chance Business Coalition or they're not part of the local Reentry coalition, because there's hundreds of these, thousands of them, local organizations doing this grassroots work and some on the national level. Many of these companies aren't part of it, but it's because they've done a really good job of actually setting culture or removing barriers systemically, like making sure that there aren't systemic barriers weeding people out. And I don't think that that's unintentional. They should be getting the praise because those leaders didn't accidentally hire thousands of people with records. I think at some point, leaders in the company said, there's no point. It's a waste of money. And if they're going to be a good employee, let's hire them. If they make it to the offer, that means they were the best candidate, right? There is a natural process. The natural process is if we interview 10 people and we make you an offer, you were the best candidate for the job. And we should only weed you out after that if your crime is a direct conflict that puts unnecessary burden and risk on the company. It should not just be because we're biased and scared, or we don't know what our boss would think, or some system weeded you out that wasn't even a human making a decision. There are certainly companies in our system that would surprise you. And then there's a lot of companies that you thought, based on press releases or something, were like the leaders in the space, but maybe only one person or 5 people have been hired there through our system. We can only verify, a handful of people. It is definitely an interesting dynamic.
It's also something interesting for a corporate leader to be aware of, right? That their performance here is something that they should be aware of, maybe keep track of, and that other people can see and as a reflection, as a publicly accessible reflection of how they're living up to their values potentially.
Yeah. We haven't got any cease and desist yet, but it'll probably come eventually from somebody who doesn't like what they see.
So at Economic Architecture, we look at what does the structure of the marketplace start to look like? Here you have people who may be returning citizens. People need a job, that first job. They're usually in a position where they may be disconnected from their social networks, intentionally or otherwise. They may not be used to the context they're now living in. They may not have been recently connected to the job market, and they now need to navigate really complex piece of information, massive amounts of that information, and the stakes are really high. They need to get this job. They need to start this progress. So you look and you say, there's all these really big roles are being put on the shoulders of people who may not be really well positioned right now to address them. As I think of Honest Jobs and what you're doing is you're saying collectively, we can help provide job seekers with a lot of the information that they need to actually be actionable here, right? To identify, are they a good fit for this role? If we make the investment to an employer to get all the way through an interview process and get an offer, are they likely to actually go ahead and hire?
And what we found is that is very helpful, but it's usually not enough. That information needs to be given to a person who can, this sounds almost like offensive, but it's not. It needs to be given to a person who can really comprehend it and understand it. Like oftentimes a job seeker comes to us and they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, it says green, red. Okay, I get that. Green means good, red means bad. I see this number. But one of the hard things is if you haven't worked in reentry and you're not well aware of how it works, you get a rejection and you're like, oh, this site is just not real. It's a scam. It's fake. They lied to me. And that's not the case. We have over 4,000 reentry professionals that use Honest Jobs as part of their workflow. And they tell us, this is incredible. It's helped this many people that I like, probation officers, parole officers, reentry professionals. But what's critically important there is Honest Jobs is a tool to be used between a reentry professional and a job seeker, or between a probation officer and a job seeker, or between a family member with a college degree and a job seeker. Some of our job seekers have degrees, or they have enough computer literacy, reading literacy to be able to navigate this on their own. But there's a good chunk of people who are going to be significantly more successful if they have someone helping guide them. So it doesn't mean you have to know who hires people with records. We know that. You don't have to know if their background's going to be a problem in the background check. We know that. We're doing a lot, but it's still incredibly helpful to have a partner, usually a nonprofit or a probation or parole officer, sitting with them, helping them through that process. It takes it from here to here. It just gets a lot more successful and easier for the job seeker when they have someone helping guide them.
And that's really going to depend on what their point of reentry is, right? And are those resources available to them? Are there organizations there? Are there government budgets that are supporting some of this?
Yeah. Many of our users, I'd say the majority of them are self-service. They don't have someone helping them. Anyone can sign up and use Honest Jobs, but we have probation, parole, and nonprofits that use our Reentry Navigator tool, and that allows them to connect with their clients digitally, support them, make referrals directly through our system. They can see what their clients are doing and help guide them. And that's been a big boost in success for those people because they have a co-pilot helping them. It's affordable and easy to access for those individuals, the reentry professionals. And I don't think it's required, but it speaks to the issue that many people returning from jail and prison or impacted by the justice system lack social capital. If you or I are locked out of the workforce for whatever reason, we call on people, right? You email some friends, you reach out to a prior employer, you reach out to someone you know. They don't have that necessarily. And if they do, the person they're reaching out to might be ill equipped to help them. Maybe they don't have that much experience. So that's where we're trying to figure out how to go from like version 1.0, which is everything is done on paper or Excel sheets locally in your community, to partnering with someone like us who has national data, national insights, national knowledge that can empower that local grassroots organization to do that critical, important work that they were already doing. We just help them gain a ton of efficiency and better outcomes, hopefully.
You're going from just focusing on the primary first two stakeholders, the job seeker and the employer, and now saying, okay, well, there's this whole support infrastructure around that can be made more effective if they're using the tool, using the platform, opening the door for them to say, okay, let's make this available to you to use in your everyday work.
Yeah, we launched that initiative about 18 months ago, and it's just been incredible. We have over 400 people, 400 reentry professionals sign up every month. And those reentry professionals then invite their clients to join Honest Jobs. And those reentry professionals are able to see their clients, what they're doing, make referrals. And they're basically both getting a superpower in what they used to try to do, which is now they both have a ton of data, insights, transparency, access to our network. And it's definitely increased success rates.
That's incredible. Did you say 400 reentry professionals are signing up every month?
That's right.
Wow, that's an incredible uptake. How big is that space? How much of the potential space does that represent?
I believe that there's close to 100,000 probation and parole officers in America, and that there's more than that, somewhere between 100 and 200,000 people who are employed, where a significant portion of their job is to do reentry work. So collectively, it's between 200,000 and 300,000 people could be using our tool to execute reentry support. And some part of that obviously being related to employment. The veterans associations, we see Department of Commerce, we see churches, we see a huge wide variety of people signing up for that. And then obviously like probation, parole, and people from DOCs.
So that's an incredible kind of inflection point. Kind of as you look to the future, where does Honest Jobs grow from here?
I believe we're the first and only place where a government or anybody can really say, what employers in Florida hire people with criminal records and how many? What industries are they in? The people that did get hired with sex offenses, what type of education did they have? What type of skills did they have? What about people with DUIs? Where are they finding jobs? Let's look nationally. Let's look at the correlation between education and criminal conviction and employment outcomes. Like getting 1,000 data points to do a study like that prior to Honest Jobs was probably impossible because the DOC doesn't have this data. The Department of Commerce doesn't have it. The Department of Labor doesn't have it. Nobody has that data. And the fact that we have over 200,000 people, we know their crimes, we know their education, their work experience, and then we have the data on employers too. Like how many people with a sex offense did this company hire, or a violent crime, or a theft charge? So that data is really the core value we want to create, because we're not going to be able to create every insight that informs policy. We're not going to be able to create every product that solves a problem necessarily, but we can continue to collect and aggregate that data and be a valuable connector of tools and resources and policies. Do I know if that creates $1 billion business? I don't know. But what I know is that it can create a sustainable business that helps millions of people and could be a valuable stakeholder to governments, for-profit companies, nonprofits, and the community as a whole.
Yeah, and that source of data is, if you want to make evidence-based decisions on where you're investing, what programs you're evaluating, kind of where you put your resources, that data can be an incredibly rich source of input for that.
Yeah. And we have had talks with some governments that are really interested in that and working to create partnerships where we can share data. We haven't done that yet, where we like officially have a data sharing agreement with a partner yet, but we've definitely have some conversations in the works, because we've now talked to enough people to know that this is desired and that they don't have a better source. Many states are trying to figure out how to tie Social Security numbers from people who were released back to the Department of Labor to like reverse call on their tax returns, 10 years after they left, to try to like reverse map. If they were in prison, can we then get a contract with the Department of Labor to call back their tax returns? It may be possible, but you're expecting a state government to have multiple organizations who all struggle to do their daily work as it is, to like collaborate and innovate in a way that we might be more equipped to do that. I think the obvious, 800-pound gorilla in the room is what is AI going to do to everything, right? I think that it's going to affect everyone. And in fact, it might affect the people making predictions more than the people they predict it's going to impact, it might affect me more than someone coming home from prison. But I think that we need to turn correctional institutions into places where people learn and grow. And I don't think that's because I'm against discipline or I'm against punishment. I think it is punishment to incarcerate someone, but making sure that they have access to stay literate. Previously, people have limited access to libraries, let alone a computer lab. People should be able to access digital literacy while they're incarcerated, because we live in an age where if you are incarcerated for 10 years and you don't have access to digital tools, and I don't just mean a tablet, I mean a computer, you're handicapping them, especially in the age of AI. And what I would say is hard skills are going to be critically important. A lot of people say you're never going to lose your job if you're a plumber. I actually disagree. I think there's going to be robots doing skilled trades 20 years from now, and powered by AI. But for the next 20 years, I think it's one of the safest bets is that prisons should be teaching CDL. They should be teaching electrician. They should be teaching maintenance tech. These are roles that we get people hired into at honest jobs where they are incredibly happy. They get full benefits. They're making 80, 90, 110 grand a year. And they don't have to speak professionally. They don't have to have a college degree necessarily. They don't have to be someone they're not. Sometimes they want that business path or that engineering path. And you'd be surprised how many employers will literally second guess their policy and maybe even change their policy when they get a good candidate who's an electrician, when they've been looking for one for 4 months and they can't find one. Just because you have a felony, that might actually make them change their policy, because we have literally helped companies redraft their policies specifically to hire maintenance techs and electricians, because they knew that there's a local prison teaching these in a city where they cannot find them anywhere. And they're like, we will completely change our policy if you can help us get the people from that prison to come work here. And we did that. If you actually have a skill set that's really in demand, your record kind of almost becomes irrelevant.
And yeah, I mean, you're pointing out that there's a frontier of a lot of kind of imagination and innovation that could be coming, but also that there is real concrete potential to match demand, the demand for employees with people who have the ability to really contribute. Part of it is helping to make that connection.
The days are gone of like planning something like, oh, we're going to teach this skill because it's in demand. And then 10 years later, the people who are getting those skills are going to get those jobs. It's like the pace of innovation and change, the pace of expectation of when you hire someone is so rapid now that, we hope our data and partnership with community partners, governments, whatever it may be, can help them get to answers quicker. Like we can say, in your state, these are the people we're seeing get hired. These are the jobs they're getting hired into. So go teach that in your prisons right now. Like, I don't know how much we can help them accelerate that information loop of like, if you're trying to skill up your workforce, whatever state you're in, we can help you understand where are people getting hired, what skills do they have? Because what we saw, unfortunately, like I work in tech, I love tech, but what we saw was a boom of correctional facilities and programs teaching people in jails and prisons how to code. And we know for a fact that it's been a difficult path for the organizations and the people who graduated. It's a skill that they're going to value for the rest of their life, but that market became really saturated really quickly. And then the dynamics changed too, where there's just less engineers needed so quickly that we got to figure out how to make that information loop faster and more accurate so that the dollars being donated or granted or invested, the ROI is there.
Yeah. And that it's not a one-time thing. This has to be kind of how you live. You continue to adapt. You continue to you see the data, you see where the market's going. You're getting good information. It's kind of real-time market information. Then you can adjust your program and focus your attention on places where it's likely to make the most impact kind of in the near term.
Yeah, that's right.
Harley, this is fantastic. If you're an individual and you either yourself have been justice impacted or you have somebody in your life or in your community who is, what's the action you can take?
Sign up for Honest Jobs if you haven't. It's free. You have to observe. You have to look for people to observe. I've heard this term a long time ago. You can't be what you can't see. And I think one of the biggest things that justice impacted people are suffering from is the lull of the average of the people they're around, right? If they're around 10 people who are all just as impacted. They all don't have good jobs. They all have limited education. It's very hard to climb out of that. So the internet did a really powerful thing for all of us where books used to be, but now you have YouTube, you have podcasts. Find business podcasts, find inspiring podcasts that make you want to build a business, that make you want to learn a skill, that make you want to go to college. So that's how I started. When I came home, I was at community college, but I was obsessed over the YouTube videos and the podcasts. I was just absorbing information all the time, and it really changed me kind of from the inside out. And you'll be very surprised how quickly your vocabulary might start to change, how you carry yourself differently, how you attract better people into your life when you're pursuing something outside of maybe the hand you were dealt, right? If you were dealt a bad hand and you're in a place where you feel like there's no hope, that's a really hard place to get out of. But it starts with your mindset.
Super actionable. Someone could do it today. Harley,
Right.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Talk anytime.
What Harley's done is amazing. We know his personal story. We know the fact that he believes that it is possible to enable people who have been formerly incarcerated to be employed successfully in jobs that are really productive for them and for the employer. Harley has two distinctive innovations that create a new possibility for how he can contribute to furthering fair chance hiring. First of those is that despite the best of intentions, and maybe there are statements around the best of those intentions, there's an interesting paradox that comes up. Some employers who make public commitments about their interest in fair chance hiring don't actually do that much fair chance hiring. And the flip side is also true. Sometimes employers who do a lot of fair chance hiring don't actually say that much about it. Harley kind of recognized this. And when he started putting the pieces together, he also started to see that instead of looking at statements of intent, he could look at existing behavior to identify employers and roles that could be a good fit for somebody who has previously been incarcerated. By doing that, he could identify an employer who has already demonstrated through their behavior that they're open to hiring somebody, and then they can inform job seekers that a company with a track record of hiring people with a criminal record is now looking for new employees. The other thing that this does is it enables Harley to gain a broad view on which employers are likely to hire, which jobs are likely to hire for, which candidates are likely to be a good fit for those positions. That was a really big step forward for the space and unlocking how we can start to help this labor market work better. Second thing is he also recognized that there are a lot of stakeholders who have a vested interest in having great information about how job seekers are doing in the job market, and that they can help provide the resources needed to help extend this platform. Before, Harley kind of existed in a kind of one-to-one, very manual labor kind of way. And Harley's helping because if the job applications actually take place on the platform, he can provide a scalable, robust, in a very efficient way for everybody to communicate about what those opportunities are. And so he's really creating a real value proposition to people in the career pathing role. And that creates the possibility for a revenue stream, which is really important because it's providing this utility for job seekers. And he's seeing massive uptake of this. And as he's going, the third thing that he's doing is he's starting to aggregate a massive amount of data about how this all works across the economy. And he'll have access to kind of information and data in a real-time basis that it just naturally accrues out of the course of doing business that's better than large-scale government resources can accumulate because he's capturing it at where the transactions actually occur. By doing this, you have a really smart innovator, understands the issue, has identified a way to kind of situate himself and their work with a priority focus on the job applicant, but recognizing that there are other stakeholders that have a vested interest, creating the possibility of an enduring and growing revenue stream that creates an asset that potentially could benefit our ability to address this systemically. I'm Stuart Yasgur, and this is Economic Architecture, the podcast.